So hello and welcome to the 2023 Southeast Collaborative Online Conference. My name is Lauren Clossy. I'm the Continuing Education Consultant from the State Library of North Carolina, and I'll be your host today. The title of our session today is We Are Number One, the Role of Academic Libraries in Supporting First-Generation Students in Their Journey to Academic Success. Our presenter today is Dawn Behrend. This event is supported through funding from the Library Services and Technology Act through the Institute of Museum and Library Services. Please feel free to ask questions or make comments in the chat or interact with other attendees or with the speaker within the Whova app as you watch this presentation. And now I will turn it over to you, Dawn. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. Slide here. Like Lauren mentioned, my name is Dawn Behrend, and I am an instruction and outreach librarian at Lenoir-Rhyne University. That is a private liberal arts university in Hickory, North Carolina. I am a second career librarian, so I've spent over 20 years in the mental health field as a master's level clinical psychologist. And I still do that part-time, 1 day a week doing psychological evaluation. So that kind of explains my interest in the mental health aspect of things. If you ever want to contact me, I do have my email here. These slides will be available to you, so please feel free to reach out if you have any questions or comments after this presentation. So today, what our learning objectives are to develop an understanding of the experiences, perceptions, and needs of first-generation students for library spaces, resources, and services. To form effective strategies for outreach and ways to partner with campus, academic, and support services to better serve first-generation students, and to increase awareness of the mental health challenges that first-generation students may face, and ways that the library can raise mental health awareness and reduce the stigma of seeking help for mental disorders. So before we launch into those topics, I did want to give a little bit of historical context about first-generation students and the issue of student success in higher education. So in the 1960s and 70s, there was an open admissions movement that really wanted to try to make higher education more accessible for people. So anybody with a high school diploma or a GED was really supposed to be able to have accessibility to a college education, to be admitted. And there were also the federal TRIO programs that started in 1964. These are things like Upward Bound, Student Support Services. These were programs that were really geared to help what they termed disadvantaged students to have access to a four-year education or a college education. So with these programs, higher education became more accessible in terms of admission. But what we found is that many of the students really weren't quite prepared. They may have come from schools that didn't really maybe prepare them that well for higher education, or they may come from backgrounds where they were disadvantaged and didn't really have those opportunities to become what we would term college ready. And so really libraries and universities have started to focus more on how students can be successful beyond just being admitted to the university. And of course, academic libraries have really become involved in demonstrating how they're important for student success. This helps show our value, ways that we can contribute to not only having students admitted to college, but staying enrolled, completing their degrees. And so ACRL has been pivotal in doing a lot of research that really kind of makes it obvious in how academic libraries have been helpful with this bottom line of student success. And so their research has found that students benefit from library instruction in their initial coursework. So those students who had a library instruction session in their initial coursework did better in their course than the students that did not have that session with a librarian. They've shown that any kind of library use increases student success. This could be checking out a book, making use of the space, accessing a database, but in any way that they're using the library, can be linked to those students being more successful, which would be things like GPA or being retained, staying in school. The research also shows that collaborative academic programs and services involving the library enhance student learning. So when libraries partner with things like writing centers or speech labs or tutoring, this has positive outcomes for the students. They also find that information literacy instruction strengthens those general education outcomes, those core competencies, things like critical thinking, ethical reasoning, being able to effectively identify and use information is all very important. And that any kind of library research consultation is going to boost student learning. So there's some really clear research out there that shows that academic libraries can be shown to impact student success. And this is where you can access some of this research here, this link on the bottom. So some practical implications for us as librarians using this type of research would be to show that, yes, the library does contribute to improved student retention. That library instruction is going to add value to a student's long-term academic experience. And that the library promotes academic rapport and student engagement. And you'll see as I go through my information about first-generation students that one of the most important aspects of those students staying enrolled, finishing their education, is feeling a sense of connection and engagement with their university. And that the use of a library space really relates positively to student learning and success. And there have been some information that the U.S. Department of Education actually does take into account retention of first-generation students as a metric of how successful the institution is. So when we think about first-generation students, and we will see that they do have lower numbers of retention, how can the library really work to keep these students enrolled and being successful in their coursework? So this is where we can kind of take a look at that. So before we kind of, again, look closer at libraries, it's important to understand what we mean by first-generation student. So there have been a lot of different definitions in the higher education research and the library and information science research and how they define a first-generation student. One of the studies I looked at, they found that there were up to 18 different definitions in the literature. So what this means is it can really be hard to apply this research to these first generation students as a group. So it is helpful. So as I share this information with you, it is helpful, but we might be missing a lot of students or not be, exactly clear on how we're defining that first generation student. And so the most common definition lately is to use the federal definition from the Higher Education Act of 1965. This is the definition that my university uses. And this definition is saying that first generation is a student who is either the first in their family to attend college or whose parents did not graduate from a four-year institution. And there can still be confusion here because when we're talking about a parent, we're talking about foster parents, step parents, single family homes. So again, it can be confusing. Also, the Census Bureau does not track parents' educational attainment anymore. So the only way a university knows how many or who their first gen students are is by those students self-reporting. There's a box on the common application that they fill in that tells whether they're first gen or not. I've been involved in a lot of first gen events on my campus over the past year or so. And I'll ask students, are you first gen? And they'll say, no, well, maybe, I'm not sure. And they'll say things like, well, my brother went to college, so I'm not first gen. But then you'll talk to them and their parents did not finish a four-year education, or maybe they had a two-year education. So then they'll find out, well, yes, I am first gen. I didn't realize that. And so if they're having to self-report their status, it may again be that we're missing a lot of people because they don't really know if they're first gen or not. But what we can kind of put together with the research that we have are some characteristics of first generation students. And some of these they may sound negative, but again, we're going to take a positive and a look at this as well. So just in general, first generation students do tend to come from lower socioeconomic status or background. They tend to be a person of color. They tend to be older than the continuing gen peers. And they tend to be female. And they often have children. And so these are just some of the characteristics that have been noted for first generation students and how they might differ from continuing gen students. And they also might be the child of an immigrant or a non-native English speaker. This is just an infographic that kind of breaks this down a little bit more. And you can see that there's not maybe huge differences in some areas, but there is significant. So we can see that, for first gen students, they're less likely to attend full time. They're taking care of children. And we can see that they come from a wide range of racial backgrounds as well. So they're very diverse. And some additional statistics that we can kind of look at is that 1/3 of college students are first gen. So 1 in 3 undergraduates are actually first generation. This is the most rapidly growing student population, but they have the highest dropout rate. So there's that. Only 56% of first gen students earn a bachelor's degree within 6 years, compared to 74% of their continuing gen peers. So they're just, again, not finishing these degrees always. There's also some more information that if somebody comes from a 2-parent home where both parents have a bachelor's degree, those students have an 82% completion rate. So that really kind of makes a stark difference there. We do know that these first gen students typically have fewer financial resources. The median parental income for these students is around $41,000 a year, as opposed to about $90,000 household income for a continuing generation student. And they have to work more hours, which makes sense since they have less financial help. They're working about 20 hours a week in addition to going to school, as opposed to about 12 hours a week that our continuing gen students are working. And they're more likely to commute or live off campus, which again relates to that sense of how engaged they feel, how involved they are in that university community. And these come from the Center for First Generation Student Success, which is a really great website that I highly recommend if you want to know more about this population of students. So there's also some information that we have about how first generation students make use of student services on campus. And we're seeing that they're actually using these services at a lower rate. And again, there was that library research that shows, or higher ed research that shows students that are making use of these services are achieving better. So we definitely want to see, maybe as librarians, what can we do to connect these students to these services that they're not really using. Either they're not aware or they're just not making use of it. But health services, only about 14% of continuing gen use these health services on campus, as opposed to 29% of our continuing gen students. They're using academic advising, about 55% are using that, as opposed to 72% of our continuing gen students. So they're not making use of that as much. And just support services, academic support services, about 30% are using that for first gen, as opposed to 37% of our continuing gen. And again, these come from the Center for First Generation Student Success. So there are some challenges that our first generation students are legitimately facing in completing their education. One thing would be having to navigate what we might call the hidden curriculum. So these are things about university life that maybe people that are continuing gen or faculty or staff just assume everybody knows. But for a first gen student, they don't know these things. Things like, to take a good look at the syllabus, what a syllabus is, what are office hours, how do you use these campus supports, How do you fill out a financial aid document? What's the etiquette of communicating with a faculty member? I was first gen myself, and so I did not know any of these things. And I still have very vivid memories of even just trying to figure out how to register, that I was supposed to get my books from the bookstore on campus. I didn't even know that I could use like health services on campus for the longest time. So my daughter now is in university, and I prepared her for all these things and what she can do. So I can see the difference in my own life there. They also have, a lot of challenges with that life work study balance. They're working more hours. They're not getting help from home financially as much. And so they're having to really kind of balance out not only their studies, but all of these other responsibilities too. They might be facing microaggressions, so they often come from minority racial groups. So they, hopefully this isn't still happening, but there could still be some microaggressions that these students are facing just because they come from a diverse or just a different background in terms of socioeconomics and whatnot. So these students might have that sense of being an imposter, that imposter syndrome, that they don't belong, they're not supposed to be there. And there's one of the huge things they really grapple with is family achievement guilt. So, they're excited about going to the university and possibly having a different lifestyle and pursuing some different things, but they're leaving behind family members that don't have those advantages and don't have those opportunities. And then by them leaving, they're not even contributing as much financially or helping to take care of family members. So there's a lot of guilt that they feel about just being here in college. So those are all kind of some kind of bummer things that we just talked about, but really the research has shifted in recent years to really focus on the difference between a deficit and an asset-based model as we're thinking about these first-gen students. So historically, higher ed has taken a deficit view of first-gen students. Like, what are they lacking? So they're going to come here and they're not going to know this hidden curriculum. They're not going to have good study skills. They didn't score as high on their advanced coursework, whatever. So we're kind of looking at what are they lacking as they come in historically. And the deficit-based model really we're shifting more towards an asset-based model, or what is termed a funds of knowledge approach, to really embrace and apply what they bring with them to college. So they come with a lot of positive traits, a lot of life experience that is going to enhance the experience for themselves as well as the other students that they're with. So this has been more of the shift. So talking about that funds of knowledge, just to kind of say what that is. Funds of knowledge was originally defined by researchers Louis Moll, Kathy Amonte, Deborah Neff, and Norma Gonzalez in 2001. And they use this term to refer to the historically accumulated and culturally developed bodies of knowledge and skills essential for household or individual functioning and well-being. So again, what are these students bringing with them culturally, that they have developed and that help them function? And these are things that they're going to share with other students as they're here in the university. So it really highlights that connection among students learning and experience both within and outside of the classroom. And it's really prioritizing what are their interests, what are their questions, how are they actively participating and seeking their own answers. So just kind of keep this in mind, as this is kind of how we're really looking at first-gen students at this point. Now that deficit-based model, again, looked at them as more, these are some outsiders, it's a problem to be solved, they're at risk, they're failing to achieve, they're not seeking out resources. And this is really unfortunate because it's more of an assimilationist approach. It's saying the university has these norms and it's up to the student to come and internalize these norms to be successful, that hidden curriculum. It's up to them to figure that out and kind of internalize that. And this places the burden on the student. It refers to them as saying they're not college ready. So this is where that deficit-based model is not very helpful. A contrast to that asset-based model or funds of knowledge, we're looking at these students as academic learners. And this is one of the studies I reviewed, and I do have a bibliography that I have shared, and this is all in that bibliography, but this really means that these students are engaged in sociocultural processes involved in disciplinary knowledge acquisition, production, and application. So they're not just there passively to kind of internalize norms that are there, but they're there actively acquiring, producing, and applying knowledge. They're resilient. They don't have all the advantages that maybe a continuing gen student has, but they're there and they're working and they're going to school and they're taking care of family members and they're still, hanging in there. So, this is really important to recognize that they do come with a lot of resiliency. And they're bringing these valuable experiences and knowledge that they can share and kind of open the eyes of their other students that they're with, that there's different ways of life and different challenges that people have and how people can, use that to their advantage to continue to grow. Now this, asset-based model says really it's on the institution to be student ready rather than making the students be college ready. So what can we do as an institution to be ready for these students and to help them? So again, that's where we come in as librarians. What are we going to do to help be student ready for this population? So before we kind of get into some specifics of how we can do that, just wanted to touch on the concept of intersectionality. I am not an expert on this topic, but I have, it is something that people are talking about a lot more lately. Kimberly Crenshaw, she's a law professor and a social theorist. She coined that term in a 1989 paper. And it's become much more something that we're talking about. I hear it a lot in presentations and in the literature. And what it is, it's just a framework for conceptualizing a person, a group of people, or social problem as affected by a number of discriminations and disadvantages. And that people's overlapping identities and experiences are important to understand the complexity of the prejudices they face. So for first gen students, what this means is that term's pretty broad. It doesn't really encompass all of these different identities that they're coming in with. And so it may be overly simplistic just to say, we're going to serve first gen students. So very diverse group, lots of overlapping identities going on. So trying as much as you can to kind of work with the whole person, and taking into account all of the things that might play into their life experiences and how they're doing at the university. So here we get to the crux of the presentation, which is what can we do? What about first gen and libraries? So one thing we know about, this is just some of the literature about libraries and first gen. So these students do tend to connect much less with their parents than their continuing gen peers do. So what this lets us know is that they might need some help learning how to use a library. So, we may have to kind of find other pathways to let them know what's available on campus, what's available at the library. So the parents aren't necessarily there providing that guidance, or they're not reaching out to those parents for that. These students do tend to perceive research as a single step activity rather than an interconnected process. So all of us that do library instruction, reference, we know that there's so many different phases and steps to this research process. And so as we're working with these students, what can we do to kind of help them understand the bigger picture when it comes to research and how we can help with that? And these students are more likely to seek help from either their instructor or some informal network than librarians. So again, what can we do to be approachable? What can we do to make sure that they're thinking of us when they need help? And we know that they take our resources and spaces and they fit it to their needs. So even if we don't set something up in a certain way, they're going to adapt it and make it fit for them. So that's, again, their resiliency that they have there. But they're going to adapt what we have to fit what they need. And we do know from the research that just spending time in the library can lead to feelings of community, belonging, and purpose in academic pursuits. So they're here, in an academic setting. They're seeing other students studying, and and that can be very motivational for them. So anybody using that library space is going to feel more that sense of community. So we want to make sure that it's a place they want to come to feel that connection. So how do we make that connection? So what are some ideas? And I say best practices. The research is really developing. I wouldn't say there's hard, clear rules about what's best, but just in me combing through the research, there were certain things that just kept coming up. And so I would think at this point, these are best practices as much as we can say. So early on, we want to kind of catch these students early in the process. So one thing we can do is we could try to reach out and see if we can take part in these summer bridge programs, orientation sessions, early admission events. Now, some of these programs, again, take that view of the assimilationist approach. So they're trying to teach them what to expect. Our role as librarians would be to say, we're here, we're approachable, we're fun. And so hopefully that reduces that library anxiety. It's less intimidating. They can recognize somebody that when they come to the library, they could come up and talk to. So just making those early connections. See if you can provide input into the script for your admissions tours that really highlights the library as a welcoming space and that there's resources here for these students. So just really kind of, we've tried that at my university. I can't say we've been totally successful, but really just trying to kind of get that plug in for your library as people are visiting and considering the university. You might consider offering maybe an early application process for first-gen students that want to work at the library. This helps them out financially. They can use their work study money, and it also just gets them in the door, and it gets them to see, how the library operates and to be part of that. So consider that. Another thing we want to do as librarians is to see what can we do to make these students help them understand that asking for help is good. It's not a weakness. It doesn't mean that they're doing something wrong or that they're an imposter, that seeking help is great. It's going to help them. There's nothing wrong with that. So just facilitating that for them. So just letting them know that we're here for them, that, I do a lot of embedded librarianship. So I have a lot of courses that I do one-shot sessions in. Every time I do a session, I get in the Canvas course. We use Canvas here. And I put in a library research module. And it always has my contact information, a bookings link to make an appointment, LibGuides that are relevant, and just anything to let them know that, hey, I'm here to help you. Just reach out. You want to offer study spaces that are prominent and accessible and that are going to really model students using the library in their academics. So like that research showed about being in the library, being connected to success. So, we all have tight budgets. My library doesn't have the best furnishings and whatnot, but we do try to arrange things and to, make it like user friendly for the students and to really signal that we want you to use this space for what you need it for. If you have a program for first-gen students, don't label it as at risk or, use a negative term. Again, looking at that asset-based model, we don't want to use terms like at risk when we're working with first-gen students. Offer workshops, just on how the library operates. Again, we don't want to assume that they know this hidden curriculum. So how do you just do some basic things in the library, checking out a book or getting to a database or off-campus resources, and any other special topics that might be helpful just to kind of orient people to how the library works and what we have to offer. And I think we all do this, but offering communication in a variety of modes. So they're going to have less time, to come in maybe and meet with you personally. Maybe they're stressed and don't feel like having an in-person session. Maybe they prefer in person. They don't want to be in personal and chat. So, but just offering reference through email, chat, in person, just different ways they can get in touch with you. And then take a look at your library website. Is it user-friendly? Like if you had never been to college and you looked at your website, would you know how to get to the database? Would you understand all the stuff that's going on your page as far as, if you have a discovery tool, how do you get to that? How do you, just is it user friendly? Look at it with a new set of eyes. And see if there's anything you need to do to change your website in terms of accessibility, being user friendly. And avoid jargon. So when you're interacting with these students, whether you're teaching a session or you're helping them one-on-one, we all get used to the library jargon and everything. So just try as much as you can to avoid that jargon so it doesn't put up an unnecessary sense of intimidation or library anxiety for these students. And then offer tools for self-guided learning when preferred, things like LibGuides, that kind of thing. So not everybody's going to have the time or want to come see you. So how else could they get this information? So there's some tips too that's specifically for library instruction. And again, this all comes from the literature, which is in the bibliography. So if you want to delve into this more, it'll be there for you. But talking about that funds of knowledge, asset-based model, when we're doing a library instruction session, and I think we all try to do this, but just valuing what the students are bringing with them. So they have some pre-existing knowledge about the world and letting them have a chance to apply that to the research skills that you're trying to teach them in your library instruction sessions. Be transparent in your design of assignments, and some of us are probably teaching credit courses on library or information literacy. Some are just doing one-shots and have maybe an assignment at the end of the session. But transparent design of assignments just means that when you give an assignment, we might assume that the students can see why we did that clearly this is measuring such and such, and this is your first steps to do it. So first gen students may not understand that. They may not know why you asked them to do this certain thing. So they're having to spend valuable time just figuring out the assignment, the why of it and the how. So kind of talk about, this is why we're doing this. This is what this is going to measure. These are your first steps to start this. This is what I'm looking for. So it just kind of saves them that time and effort so they can go ahead and launch into the actual work of the assignment. Recognize that these students are going to have a variety of perspectives and stories that you can work into, maybe examples that you're using as you're doing database searches or any kind of assignments that you have them doing on information literacy, and give that a chance to be there. And we want to offer time for reflection. So we want to give them a time to think about what we're telling them, reflect on it, and then we're going to adapt to their experiences. So maybe they'll share something that maybe we'll take our example and our, planned out session into a different direction. And that's good. That's fine. We're trying to adapt to what the students are bringing with them. Try to incorporate the framework. There's a lot of great pieces to the framework for ACRL that really helps kind of demystify scholarship for these students. So saying authority is constructed and contextual, scholarship is a conversation, really shows that they have a role in this scholarship. They're not just taking it in passively, but again, they're these active learners. And so they're coming in and maybe having a different view of how they're looking at and assessing information. I want to make it fun, so I always try to end my classes with a Kahoot, and the students really come alive at that time. They, even if they didn't speak at all during the whole class, they really get excited, and I make it fun. It's not a hard quiz. It's fun. It's got silly memes and pictures, and they can earn like a little prize at the end. So that just shows, hey, it's not just, stuffy, research. The librarians can be fun. The library can be a fun place to be. Everybody can participate. And then offer opportunities for peer interaction. So let them maybe interview each other if they're maybe put some first gen students together and let them interview each other about their experiences coming to the university, or vice versa, having a more diverse group of students talking about different things that are relevant to their backgrounds. So we also want to leverage our library spaces. So we know how important it is that these students use the space. So we definitely want to be offering culturally diverse displays and events. We want students from diverse backgrounds to come in and see things that represent them. And so, at my university, we do a lot of things with Black History Month, Hispanic Heritage Month. So just different things throughout the year. We have displays and different, treats and crafts that go along with that, different books that highlight those different groups. And so we're really trying to make an effort to do that. And we also partner with our multicultural affairs on campus to highlight these events. Try to have a diverse staff of library professionals and student workers. So again, we want students to come in from a variety of backgrounds and see people that are like them using the library, and makes it more approachable. And it really helps inform us too. Again, that funds of knowledge, we want a variety of perspectives and experiences to help guide what we're offering to our library users. Signage, that's always a big issue with people, is how to get that, good signage in your library, but, making sure it's welcoming, that it's not just a bunch of no's, it's welcoming, it's consistent. Again, don't assume that hidden curriculum that people obviously know this is this or that. They don't. So make it clear, consistent throughout your library. We know these students are struggling financially a lot of times, and so what can we do to help? Maybe, and this is a touchy issue, and my university, we have it in our policy that we're not providing textbooks, but if you can, and if that's allowable, offering textbook reserves, tech lending, things like hotspots. We do lend out Chromebooks at my library. And allow them to customize the space as much as possible. So everything doesn't have to be exactly in the same space. If it's working for the students, that's okay. And offer a variety of study spaces, different noise levels, lighting, furnishings. The picture I'm showing here, this is a family room at an academic library. There's been a big trend to offer spaces where students with children can work on their academics while their children are safely there in the room with them, reading, playing, and they can book these rooms out to use. So that's something that a lot of libraries are starting to try to incorporate for students that have families. So another important part is really connecting. We saw that, when libraries partner with support services on campus, this benefits the students. So first step, find out what's going on already on your campus for first gen. So I became interested in this at my library, and I went to student success office at my university who said so-and-so's involved with first gen. And so I didn't have to replicate all of their efforts. They were up and running. And what you can do is then you can kind of piggyback on what they're doing as being their library liaison or a personal librarian. This is something that's not always in our control. We try to do this, but co-locating academic support services in the library really helps. So if they have financial aid, career services, tutoring, writing center right there in the same building, that makes it more likely that these students are going to make use of those, and we can refer them. Hey, just go upstairs and here's this service for you. Try to connect with parents to give them some information about the library. It could be a newsletter, an email, a LibGuide for the parents, just something that lets them know what we have to offer, and then hopefully they're going to then communicate that to their students and kind of advocate for them to use the library. Work with your university's mentoring and advising programs to really urge them or to have them really urge their first gen students to make use of the library. Let them kind of communicate how important that is. And then reach out to campus partners to offer events and programming that support first gen students. So sometimes we don't have a huge budget, but we do have space. And so we can say, come to our library and host this event. So some potential ideas again would be maybe having financial aid come and have a table so they can help students fill out FAFSA forms, learn about scholarships. You could invite career services to host workshops on things like how do you find an internship, internship etiquette, creating a resume. And we've done some of this at my library too. We've coordinated on those efforts. Counseling services, you can, during high stress times like finals week, what have you, offer them a room or a table and have the counselors come to the library, and they're just there for somebody to stop by and talk to. It doesn't have to be a session, but they're just there maybe for a quick, talk, and then, maybe connect them with some services if they need it. And health services, you could offer space where they could hold vaccine clinics or share sexual health kits or just raise awareness that they're there for health services. And maybe have your health sciences librarian there to share some consumer health information. But just shows the library's there, it's involved. And again, we're using our space to let the students know how to get engaged, how to make use of these services. So some opportunities for research, and these you can have a pop-up event to promote these library resources and services for first-gen students. At my library, we have a first-gen program. They do first-gen Fridays, and I come, it's the first Friday of every month, and I come and I have my own table and I talk about the library, and we have like a giveaway and a drawing and all these things, so it's fun. See if your university has a first gen club. If not, you could start one. We have an active club at my university, and the students really enjoy being part of that. Look to see if your university has a living learning community that caters to first generation students or involves first generation students, and maybe you can get involved with that as well. Celebrate National First Generation College Celebration. So we called it National First Gen Day. This was last November. There's been five annual events of this, so I think it'll continue. I have a link here for more information, but it's just a way to celebrate these students at your university. So at my university, we had food trucks, and we had on our quad, we had all of these tables, we had face painting and a photo booth, and just things to say, we're glad you're here. And again, connect with your Office of Student Success. They're often very involved in first gen students, and they're interested in helping them, and that might be a good first stepping point for you. This link here is just me showing off a little bit. This is just our Lenoir-Rhyne University, what we do for first gen students. It just shows all of these different activities. That might be an example if you're interested in kind of working with your university to kind of start some efforts there. And I just have some pictures of some fun things we've done. This is our First Gen Fridays. You can see how we're celebrating these students with stickers and treats and balloons and pictures, and we're just highlighting how happy we are that they're here. This was our First Gen Day, so these are lots of fun things that we did at our event. So you can see it's really all about the relationship. There's all these research things that are telling us do this, don't do that. Really forming the relationship with the students. If you're being inclusive for first gen students, it's going to translate to being inclusive to all your students. So it's a really kind of a way of just building these relationships with students. So before we kind of wrap it up here, I just want to talk a little bit about the mental health needs of first generation students, how that might be something to consider as well. In general, we know there's a connection between mental health and academic success. So mental health challenges are correlated with lower academic achievement and risk of dropping out. That's what the research shows us. If a student has a pre-existing mental disorder, they're more likely to drop out than a student who develops a disorder while they're in college. So in students, what we're seeing, there's been a real uptick in mental health issues in college students. So we know that up to 44% of college students report symptoms of anxiety and depression. Unfortunately, this is a terrible statistic, but suicide is the third leading cause of death in college students. And almost half of college students report having had a psychiatric disorder in the past year. So I think there's a stereotype that college is this fun, carefree, party time. But as we can see, for a lot of students, it's a time that's really challenging for them in terms of staying well mentally. And we do know that 73% of students experience some kind of mental health crisis during college. And then unfortunately, only 25% of students with a mental health need actually seek out help. Some common mental disorders, a 2021 survey found that 31% of students were diagnosed with an anxiety disorder, followed by depression or a mood disorder at 27%, and 8% had some kind of trauma disorder like PTSD. So definitely, knowing that our students are struggling, what can we do to help? So first generation students may have some particular risk factors. We know they have this conflicting identity, that family achievement guilt that we talked about. They're not getting as much support from home with their family and friends. They have tremendous financial stressors. They have to work a lot. And the research has shown that first-gen students report that they need but don't use mental health services at a higher rate than continuing gen students. And that maybe they just clearly don't know it's there, how to access it, or they're just so busy and overwhelmed, it's hard for them to make the time. But again, the asset-based model, protective factors. So what we know are that pre-college factors, things like socioeconomics, level of academic preparedness, things that people come to college with, that's less detrimental to academic success than how integrated they are in the academics and the campus once they get to college. So again, trying to really pull them into engagement and help them connect with what's available at the library and across campus. And we know there's a strong relationship between a sense of belongingness, social support, and inclusivity with persistence in school. So really staying enrolled, finishing their degree is really connected to them feeling a sense of belonging. So the library, we can be a mental health advocate. We're creating a safe, welcoming, and inclusive communal space. We're helping make referrals to campus resources. That's not necessarily our job, but we're all about connecting people to information. I created a LibGuide on my campus for both campus and community resources for counseling, food pantries, homelessness. So there's things that you can do to just let people know, their students know what's available and for help, and how do they get that. Partner with your campus wellness program, so your counseling program, your health programs, to offer awareness tables in your library or panels or events. Offer de-stress and self-care events. So we created self-care bags. We have a mental health table once a month. So just things to kind of nudge them towards, taking good care of themselves. One thing I'm really proud of at my university is I've developed a mental health awareness collection. So we have lots of materials, different books, pamphlets, you name it, all about some different mental health disorders, but also mindfulness, self-care. So just a whole range of things. And these books are really circulating. So we're happy to see the students are making use of this. You can reach out to the National Institute of Mental Health, and they'll send you brochures and pamphlets about mental disorders and different things like that, free of charge, no shipping. So that's something you could offer at your library. And consider workshops or invited talks on mental health topics. So we did a mental health panel last semester where I had therapists both on campus and from the community to talk about what are some mental health struggles that college students have. What is it like to go to counseling? How do you get involved in counseling? And then we answered questions, and it was just a good event. Oops. Gotta skip the resource thing. Okay, here we go. Skip this slide. So this is, again, just showing a little bit about what we're doing at LR. That was our panel that we did, self-care bag, our mental health awareness table that we host. We have therapy dogs. This is our mental health awareness collection. So we're just doing as much as we can to show the students that we're here for them, for their mental wellness. Just some quick recommended resources. Again, this is a great website, Center for First Generation Success, has some really evidence-based practices, good information, just to kind of learn more about the topic. There's the Post-Secondary National Policy Institute that has some fact sheets on first-gen students. And there's the First Gen Foundation that really tries to help connect first gen students with universities and colleges that are really kind of making efforts to support those students. And again, I mentioned I have a bibliography available for you as well. And these are just a couple examples of a first gen LibGuide. So Arizona State has a really nice LibGuide as an example of what you could do to kind of just highlight resources for this population. And then Pitt Community College as well had a nice LibGuide. So just a couple examples in case you want to make your own. And I think that is the end of my presentation. So it's just time for any questions and answers.
Thank you so much, Dawn. This was excellent. Thank you for sharing with us today. And thank you, everyone, for attending our webinar. If you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to the speaker or to conference hosts using the Whova app. And an evaluation is provided with the conference session resources. And we welcome your feedback about this session and about our conference in general. Thanks everyone for making the 2023 Southeast Collaborative Conference successful, and we hope to see you all again next year.